Star Wars 7x7, episode 1925. Today, we're going to finish our look at the series of Age of Resistance stories to give us some more insight into the major players that will appear in the Rise of Skywalker. Today, we are looking at Supreme Leader Snoke. Punch it. Hey Rebel Rouser, I'm Alan Voivod and this is Star Wars 7x7. Thank you so much for joining me for this episode. So, the Supreme Leader Snoke story has been talked about in certain circles as being indicative of how Palpatine might have survived the events of Return of the Jedi. And we will talk about the whole theory after the break, which is not coming up yet. But here's the deal with the story that we are told about Supreme Leader Snoke, which is really just as much about Kylo Ren as it is about Snoke. And this is a full spoiler podcast, so if you have not read the story for Supreme Leader Snoke that appeared in the Age of Resistance comics and Marvel, then by all means save this episode for a later date. But if you're okay with me telling you what the deal is with the story and what's notable about it, then let's dive in. So it starts with what essentially amounts to an evil trust fall exercise where Snoke is levitating Kylo Ren over a large, horrible abyss with pointy rocks far, far below, and he lets him go. But instead of actually catching him, which is what Snoke says Skywalker would have done, he lets Ren fall to either his death or Ren needing to be able to save himself somehow, which he does. And according to Snoke, that would have basically been coddling Kylo Ren and not allowing him to live up to his full potential, which I guess, in a way, you could kind of see the argument there. Like, take away the safety net and suddenly it gets easier. I mean, I've heard that about wire walkers, for example, that they actually do better without a net because, the knowledge that you could fall and be okay seems to, make them a little bit more careless, if you will. That's, that's at least a story that I've heard once or twice. Be that as it may, Kylo survives, and so Snoke says, I've got a new challenge for you. And they head to Dagobah, of all places. So they actually sneak into the known galaxy for a start. And not only that, but go to Dagobah, where Kylo says that he can still feel the presence of Luke Skywalker having been there all those years ago. Snoke actually reveals that he respects Luke and fears him, which is surprising to Kylo Ren. Kylo thinks that Luke is weak, but Snoke says he's not weak, he's misguided. And adding insult to injury, he says, if I had Luke by my side instead of you, I would have conquered this galaxy a long time ago. And the injury is when they arrive, and Kylo wants to put his mask on, and Snoke says, leave it. And Kylo's like, and Snoke just smacks him and says, you can't hide behind a mask here, you can't pretend to be Vader here, sorry. Which, yeah, so there you go. Some, interesting insight into the abusive relationship between Snoke and Kylo Ren, which, we've already known that this is an abusive relationship, but to see it depicted here is a little bit startling in its way. So, as you might expect, Kylo has to go into the same cave that Luke went into, except the way Snoke says it, he says that the only thing he's going to find in there is only what you're too weak to bury, which is an interesting contrast from the way Yoda described the cave. So he goes in and he sees Luke Skywalker, who says, I don't want to fight you, and Snoke is monitoring this through the dark side of the Force, and Kylo says, I don't care, and they fight, and he kills Luke in the cave, and Snoke is outside going, yes, yes. And Kylo thinks he's done, but he's not done. He actually has to face down Han and Leia. And here's probably one of the most difficult things he could possibly hear, which is Leia saying, Ben, and him going, that's not my name. And she says, yes, it is. You're our son, and you are loved. And my goodness, you could see a situation where he would strike back in anger at being confronted with that notion, with, those powerful words by Leia. There is a case to be made where he would have done that. And from the outside, Snoke is feeling like, yes, he's acting to strike at them and strike at the light side within himself. But in truth, and this is the twist in the episode, He's not actually striking at their images, however they're represented inside this tree. He's actually destroying tree stumps and whatnot. And the images of Han and Leia have been unscathed. So not only is it a turn from a storytelling standpoint, but it's also meant to give you the idea that this is not, well, this may be the first time, but when we see in The Last Jedi how Kylo Ren fools Supreme Leader Snoke into thinking that he's about to kill Rey when he actually kills Snoke, well, in this particular instance in the cave, this is supposed to be our first indication that, oh yeah, he's done this before. So now when we see The Last Jedi, it's like, okay, yeah, we know he's capable of pulling off that kind of stunt. And then, because it's Kylo, he just destroys the whole cave. It just collapses, and there's this giant pit on the ground, and Snoke is like, yeah, your power's impressive, but that cave's been there for thousands of years, and I wanted to bring new apprentices here. And Kylo says, you won't need any more apprentices. So that, of course, makes Snoke very happy in his evil little way. And it does make you wonder how many other apprentices Snoke has taken to this tree prior to having Kylo Ren as his apprentice. It's a very Palpatine thing to do, the notion of trying out apprentice after apprentice after apprentice, even after Darth Vader becomes his apprentice in Revenge of the Sith. Emperor Palpatine is still on the lookout for anyone who could possibly replace Darth Vader. Like, it's a constant thing, and Vader is continually having to defend his place at the right hand of Emperor Palpatine. And speaking of Palpatine, I told you that I would explain to you why this comic is giving people the notion that it suggests how Palpatine might have survived the events of Return of the Jedi. I will explain that to you after the break. Stay tuned. Hey Rebel Rouser, I've made some changes to the asteroid belt level at patreon.com/SW7X7, and they are all with sponsors in mind. So if you want to get the word out about your business, your product, your service to a dedicated Star Wars audience, then please check out patreon.com/SW7X7 and look for the asteroid belt level for details. Again, that's patreon.com/SW7X7. Welcome back. So, the thing about Palpatine, right? At the very beginning of the story that we just talked about, I shared the trust fall business, right? And that Snoke dropped him, but Kylo Ren was able to save himself. Like, he levitated himself above the pointy rocks at the last second, and that was how Kylo did not actually die in this instance. Well, there are some folks online who are saying, hey, that's how Palpatine could have survived. That once he was thrown down that power shaft in Return of the Jedi, that he could have levitated himself at the bottom and not died. Of course, that would also mean that he would have had somehow to have created that crazy whirlwind that came up from the power shaft and then sucked everything back down behind it. I suppose that's possible. Maybe that's a kind of a dark side power, but personally, I think that's, it doesn't seem to fit for me, right? We've talked about other reasons and other explanations for how Palpatine could be appearing in The Rise of Skywalker. I am not of the mind that he rescued himself in this particular manner. I think he did actually die that way, and so the manner by which he will appear in The Rise of Skywalker is still yet to be revealed. That's my take on it, but hey, if you think that's a plausible theory, then I'd love to hear you tell me that, so by all means do. But for now, that's going to do it for this episode of the show. Thank you so much for joining me for it, as always, and may the Force be with you, wherever in the world you may be.
This podcast is not endorsed or sponsored yet by Lucasfilm Limited, Disney, or 20th Century Fox. It is intended for entertainment and information purposes only. Star Wars, the Star Wars logo, all names and pictures of Star Wars characters, vehicles, and any other related Star Wars items are registered trademarks and/or copyrights of Lucasfilm Limited or their respective trademark and copyright holders. May the Force be with them. All original content is copyright 2019 by Star Wars 7x7. We hope you love it.